So this book is about 2/3 done right now, so I think I can have it done by next summer, and then it should be available for purchase in 2 summers, because that's how book publishing works in the U.S. By the way, so do you have this expression "brutally honest" in Hindi? So does that expression make sense to you? Right? It's being so honest. Like the problem with you is that the reason you can't get a date is because your personality's terrible, you're ugly, and you have dressed terribly. Right? So all true, right? Possibly, but also harsh. Oh, there we are. All right. So just to start, you've been talking about markets versus governments a lot, right? This debate has been going on for over a century. Right? So starting around 1900, a bit earlier, you've got a global system which is much more market-oriented, but there's also radical challenges. This was crucial for the history of India because India gets very quickly established as a socialist state and importing a lot of ideas and policies from the Soviet Union. Right, and at the same time, of course, the United Kingdom was also becoming socialist too, right? Or elected its first socialist government. Anyway, so this argument has been going on for a very long time. Just to let you know about the current state of the debate, in case you're unfamiliar. I think you are familiar. Most non-economists have deep skepticism of markets. Normal people, people who have not studied the subject, generally have a high level of skepticism. And they also will usually have high hopes for government. Notice, high hopes. This does not mean normal people think government is working great, but it does mean that when they think about things that could get better, they're thinking about government going and doing something great. They're not generally thinking about markets could go and do something incredibly awesome that would be a big improvement. They're thinking about, well, markets are just bad. Government, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad now, but that's what could get better, and that's what I'm going to believe in. Furthermore, most economists are also at most ambivalent about markets. There is this strong stereotype of the market fundamentalist economist, right? And when you look at the data, it just is not true. All right, so 25 years ago, the typical economist in the United States was a moderate Democrat. So you're familiar with the Democratic and Republican parties. All right, so Democrats definitely more anti-market than Republicans overall. And anytime you hear about Republicans doing or saying something anti-market, you have to realize, yes, but Democrats are more anti-market in almost every case. All right. So 25 years ago, the typical economist was a moderate Democrat. And now the typical economist is a progressive Democrat. Just to give you an idea about the numbers. So in like 1996, out of economics professors, there would have been about 3 Democrats for every 2 Republicans. Now there'd be about 5 Democrats for every 1 Republican. And out of economists under the age of 40, it would be about 15 or 20 to 1. All right, so that's just the general picture. Now, if you're wondering, like, well, where does this idea of the market fundamentalists come from? Well, like here's a famous economist who was often attacked by leftists as a market fundamentalist, Larry Summers, former president of Harvard. Right, Larry Summers has been a lifelong Democrat. One of the earliest things that he wrote was about how we needed bigger government and more redistribution. One of the most recent things that he's written, now he's a senior citizen. So he's almost the youngest professor in the history of Harvard to get tenure. Very close. And he was talking about we need more government and more redistribution then. Now he's a senior citizen. Also, we need more government and more redistribution. And yet, there are many leftists who hate him and regard him as being the same as Milton Friedman. And why is that? A lot of it is that Larry will occasionally say something they do not like. For example, during COVID, Larry said, look, we definitely want to have a lot of redistribution during COVID to go and keep people so that people don't need to go to work. And also, I think we should have more redistribution than we're doing. But then he said, but there has to be a limit. And that led to great outrage among more left-wing people in the United States. How dare he say there's a maximum amount of redistribution that you should do? All right, anyway. So anyway, this book in progress, Unbeatable, The Brutally Honest Case for Free Markets. I'm going to defend a new argument for markets and against government, but also I'm going to explain something at the same time. Why is it that it's so hard to make people love free markets? Why is there so little affection? Why is it even people who are in favor are usually like, guess it's the best we've got or the least bad? All right, and this is the slogan underlying the book. Markets do the good things that sound bad. Governments do the bad things that sound good. And that is, first of all, why markets are better than government, because it's better to be good than to sound good, right? The person who says, I love everybody, but they are a mean person is actually worse to be around than the person who says, I hate everybody, but they actually help people, right? Right? You may even know people like this, right? The officially nice person who's actually really terrible, or the officially grouchy person who's actually very kind. All right. Anyway, but before we can go on, let us back up, all right, and talk about psychology. As you may have heard, at least in the United States, economists generally do not like psychology or psychologists. Right? When I was in grad school, the words psychology and psychologists were almost always pronounced with contempt. Like, well, if you just want to be a psychologist about it, right, that face. Right? But why you'd ever want to study the subject that examines what people think and feel, who cares about that? All right. Anyway. But I, on the other hand, am a big fan of psychology, and this is the concept of psychology that I think is most undervalued, even by psychologists themselves, but definitely by the rest of the world. And the concept is called social desirability bias. How would you say that in Hindi? Can anyone give me a Hindi translation of social desirability bias? Someone. Who is the best translator in the room? Raise your hand if you are the best translator. All right, ladies, and say it loud and proud. No, loud, so everyone hears. All right, say it. All right, you've got one. All right.
I'm saying it's very tough to translate.
It's tough to translate.
You can do a Google Translate.
All right. Okay. I'll let you off the hook this time. All right. Okay. So here's what social desirability bias says. Human beings gravitate towards saying and thinking whatever sounds good. When people open their mouths, a lot of what they are doing is not trying to describe the world accurately, but to anticipate the reactions of other humans and say what will actually make people like them. All right, so whatever sounds good, and this is called social desirability bias. To be more specific, is the tendency to answer questions in a manner that will be viewed favorably by others. It's like, oh, how was your day? What is the expected answer to how was your day? Good, great. I've heard Americans are especially ridiculous on this, like fantastic, right? And like nobody ever has a day less than fantastic in America, right? But yeah, good. Like maybe you can get away with so with a closer friend. Like, oh, what's wrong? You just say like bad, terrible, worst day of my life. It's like, oh, okay, I'll just back away from you now. Right? That would be just one example. All right. Now, importantly, socially desirable claims can be true. So, like, I had a fantastic day. I really did. I keep having fantastic days in India. All right. But they're not always fantastic at every single minute of the day. All right. But anyway, they can be true. But the point is that we are inclined to give the same answer regardless of what the facts are. All right. So, like, am I fat? Look at me. Am I fat? Oh, yeah. You're beautiful just the way you are, Brian. You're perfect. Perfect. Ideal body weight. Right? All right. Now, some people are not fat, and they say, am I fat? And you say, of course, and that's true. Other people, though, are having some issues, and if they ask, the socially desirable answer is, oh, what do you mean? That's great. You're wonderful. Yes. It's like, maybe it's ruining your life, but I don't want to be the person that tells you that. All right. Now, you may have heard that economists prefer quite strongly to observe behavior rather than to just ask people questions, right? It's a very standard idea in economics. Economics isn't about what people say, it's about what people do. Normally based upon no argument at all. I was once at a dinner where people were talking with Gary Becker, and actually we were arguing about Osama bin Laden, and someone was saying, look, Osama bin Laden said the reason why he attacked was this, and Gary Becker says, That's just what he said. You can't believe anything anybody says. And then the waiter comes by and says, sir, may I take your order? And Gary Becker asked him, well, what are the specials? And he listened. He listened. He did believe what that guy said, right? And in general, if you just think about this, like, you can't believe anything anybody says, that is an absurd claim, right? Like, I have asked people in India for directions and no one has lied to me as far as I can tell. It's like, where's the store? It's over there. All right, so sometimes people's words are totally reliable and it would be strange to doubt them. If you ask the security guard where the McDonald's is and he points you that way and you're like, what kind of an idiot do you take me for? It's obviously that way. Like, normally, actually, you expect that even a total stranger will tell you the truth on certain kinds of questions. When do people stop being reliable? When do people stop being reliable? Primarily when, if they tell you the truth, it's going to look bad. All right? Now, but economists don't actually have, or really have barely had any evidence that it was actually more reliable to look at actions than words. They just assumed. Social desirability bias is psychologists actually providing the empirical proof that economists were right to think that actions are more revealing than words and that words are likely to be misleading. All right, so it does justify this preference for studying observed behavior instead of self-reports or interviews. My favorite example of this, there was a study on abortion. There were two studies on abortion. So one of them was when it asked people, hypothetically, would you abort a Down syndrome baby? You all know what Down syndrome is? Yes, sorry. Would you abort a Down syndrome baby? All right, and like between 23 and 33% of people said they would. However, there was another study of what actually happens when people have a Down syndrome fetus. And then, guess what? The actual abortion rate is like 89 to 97%. So it almost triple the rate of abortion when it's an action rather than when it's just a statement of what you would do, right? And if you think about it, it's not so surprising, right? Like saying you would abort the baby, like just because the baby is mentally retarded, you're going to abort it. Just because it would be really inconvenient for you and you don't feel like it. And no, of course not. All children are equally good. But when it's a matter of you really have to do it, then it's like, I'm just going to do this. I don't want to actually have that life. Social desirability bias, once you understand the concept, and if I've done my job, at least for the next couple of weeks, you're going to start listening to people very carefully. And you're going to be saying, wait a second. They're saying a lot of things that are not just false, but are obviously false. Like, you don't have to know any additional thing. You just look at what they're saying, look at what's happening and saying no, and just say no, wrong. And then you would have to be blind not to know that was wrong. So yeah, now of course this will cause some problems for you but that's part of the goal, right? If you go through this whole seminar and that doesn't cause conflict with anyone, what did you really learn? Anyway, it is ubiquitous. Here's a very simple example. Would you like to come to my party on Friday? Oh no, I can't. Will you be in a cage? Will you be chained up to a wall? What do you mean you can't come to my party? Okay, well, I don't want to because I have something better to do. That would be the honest thing to say, because literally speaking, you totally can come to that person's party, except under some very rare circumstances. I couldn't go to a party in Washington, D.C. an hour from now, right? Because there's no technology that will get me there in an hour. Okay, so just start listening to statements like that, and you'll realize that people are saying obvious lies routinely. Right now, the easiest way to go and spot social desirability bias, is it as a genuine example? Well, there's a saying that says actions speak louder than words, and it is a good saying. All right, so like my dad lives in Los Angeles, and he's always talking about how it's the worst place in the world. And then there's a question, well, why do you live there then? You have a house that's worth a lot of money. You could sell it and take that money and live in a bunch of other places that don't have the problems you're complaining about. So why are you still here if that's your belief? And yeah, the answer is, all right, well, he doesn't really think it's the worst place in the world. In fact, it's his favorite place. It's just that he's a complainer and likes being negative, but still, if you really press him, you say, well, I've got all my friends here, I've got this, I like this. Right? So there's a lot of things you like about it, but how come you never want to actually talk about all the things you like? You only want to talk about the things you hate all the time. All right. So why do you live there if you really hate it so much? Or another one, if someone says, oh, my faith is the most important thing in my life. How come you never go to church? How come you never read religious books? How come you don't try to convert anyone? It doesn't seem like it's actually important to you at all. Okay, that's the other one. It's like the least important thing in my life. All right, so that would be another example of that contrast. Let's see. Not advancing. Are we almost out of batteries? Or let's see. Can I? Let's see. Can I manually advance it? Let's see. Can I do that? Yeah, that'll work. Okay. Actually, so yeah. So we have a little extra time. Let me just give you some more general background about what's known about social desirability bias. So you can see it for things like voting. More people say they voted than actually vote. You can see it for church attendance. More people say they go to church than actually go. And here again, we've got two measures. We got the measure where we look at where we survey, did you go to church? We got another measure where we count the people that are in the pews. And that's all right, different numbers. And guess what? The more people are claiming to go than go. More people are claiming to vote than vote. Other things that where we see it, if you ask people, how kind are you? How generous? How much do you give to charity? Have you ever committed a crime? Right, that's the other, so then, no, of course not. But fewer people admit to committing crimes than actual crimes that are committed. Right, so there's many common examples. But now, what I will go on and say is that it is especially prominent in politics. In normal conversation, you will have a combination of actual normal statements that describe the world, plus a bunch of other things that are obvious lies, which are designed to make people like you. In politics, there's very few facts at all. It's almost all just one thing after another to get applause. All right. So here are just some very standard cases. You can multiply them easily. We will win the war on terror. With what probability and what counts as winning would be the obvious questions. But you're not going to get answers to those in a political speech, right? How often you have a politician saying, we will solve this with probability of 88%. No, like they're not going to do that. They want to indicate certainty, which you would have to be crazy to believe. Like, you're certain you're going to solve this? Couldn't there just be an accident that happens that screws everything up? Like, never mind that your track record isn't very good, right? You're like, we will end poverty. Why would you even think that's likely, much less take your word for it that it's certain? Another good example, no matter what the cost. This is classic politics. Whatever the cost, we will do it. It's like, so if it cost everything else you had and everyone had to starve to death, you would still do it? It's like, we will eradicate illiteracy, whatever the cost. What if the cost was we didn't have enough food and we were starving to death? So, like, no. First of all, you shouldn't go and starve people to death just to go and eradicate illiteracy. And second of all, it would be an enormous amount of suffering, right? All right. And then this is the one that we heard during COVID. If it saves one life, there were so many COVID rules out there where it's like, it's an enormous burden and it seems highly ineffective, but if it saves one life, if we shut down the entire university for a year, but prevent one person with a terrible medical condition from dying of COVID, that's a great deal. All right. And of course, by that logic, no one should be driving, except maybe we can drive only to go and deliver essential resources, but no recreational driving, no going anywhere just to have fun, no just going to a restaurant to enjoy it, no going to a museum, because all of these things involve a statistical risk of death, right? I have not checked your accident statistics for India. Are they bad? Yeah, they're bad. Yeah. So here's the thing. I was in Sicily a couple years ago, and their driving looks almost as bad as your driving. But I looked at their statistics, and like there were hardly any fatalities. And like they drive like that, and people don't die. I can't believe it. But yeah, this does look scarier to me. right?
It's a cost due to bad roads more than accidents.
Okay. But now again, of course, does this mean that saving lives is bad? No, but it means that the sensible thing is to balance costs against benefits and accept that every action has some small risk of death. And if you really were willing to go and embrace this, it would mean you would stay at home, hiding behind a bulletproof vest, rather than enjoying life. All right. Okay. Or something else that you can do. So this is something you can do as homework. Just pick any political speech by any politician. They have to be reasonably successful. They have to actually have an elected office. It can't just be a guy writing and saying, I'm running for president, and here, but no one's ever heard of him. It's got to be someone who actually at least had a reasonable chance of winning or has held office. And just go through sentence by sentence. Like, is that sentence literally true? Of course, if there are politicians you don't like, then it's easy to go and say false, false, lies, lies, lies. So go to a politician you like and read through their speech. And you will see, okay, strictly speaking, not true. Strictly speaking, not true. Right? Very rare that you'll actually find sentences. It would have to be at the level of like France is in Europe before they're saying something true. Otherwise, it's going to be a bunch of things like, I promise that we will do everything in our power. Very popular speech, right? All right. Okay. Which brings us to the puzzle that motivates my book. So if actions really do speak louder than words, then why are these childish words the path to power? Why is it that people not only can get elected by saying ridiculous things like it saves one life, but if they didn't, they probably couldn't get elected? Right? Imagine a politician who would just say, look, yeah, a lot of people die, but it's more important that people have a good quality of life, and like they're really old anyway. They're close to death, so what's the big deal? All right, can you imagine that politician getting elected or staying? You could get elected and then say it and then see how long you last, right? All right. Okay, so why would that be? And here's the answer I put forward, which is that actions only speak louder than words when you're spending your own time and your own money. When it's just a matter of, well, so is relieving the suffering of the poor the most important thing in life? Not when it's my money, it's not. Because I spend money on all kinds of things that are just for my own selfish benefit. And I'm guessing all of you do as well. I'm not telling you to feel bad about it. I'm just observing this is what actual human beings are like. There are very few people who actually give away all of their extra resources to the poor. Is there anyone here from an effective altruist club? No. All right. Yeah. All right. So effective altruist clubs, they say a lot of great things, but I have gone and noticed that usually the meetings don't involve helping anyone. The meetings usually it's just a social club and people make friends and have a good time and talk about some ideas and then go home. And the number of dollars raised for malaria nets from the typical EA meeting is 0. Okay. All right. So actions speak louder than words when actions speak louder than words when you are spending your own time, your own money. But when you're spending other people's time and money, when you're saying we need to go and take care of everybody, well, that doesn't actually require anything out of you. It's just we do it. All right. We need to do it. So when you're talking about spending other people's words and actions, like everyone should be doing their part, and that's like everybody but me, really. All of you folks. Then words speak louder than actions. That is when the victory goes to the person who just says the most beautiful poetry. All right, now up till now you may be thinking, yeah, well, fine, this is all kind of interesting, but isn't it pretty obvious human beings don't like saying things that upset other people? And yeah, what they're saying isn't really literally true a lot of the time. But you may wonder, can we draw any big lessons from this? The central premise of my book is yes, we can draw some very big lessons from this. Why? Well, remember where we started, Marcus versus government. All right, well, what do we call it when you spend your own time and your own money? Well, we got a bunch of words for that, but one of them is markets. Markets are where people spend their own time and their own money. And what do we call it when you spend other people's time and money? Again, yeah, well, it's government. government. It's not just socialism, right? You can have a small government and still, when you say we should go and carry out a campaign against mosquitoes, all right, well, we means government. All right, yeah. So when you're spending other people's time and money, that we are talking about government. So while it may seem like social desirability bias is very apolitical, in a sense, that's why I want to start with it, is because the idea is very general. It doesn't have any direct, obvious connection to politics. But when you really think about it, it does connect very naturally with when you're spending your own time and money, that is markets. When you're spending other people's time and money, that is government. Right here is the first big part of the book. Markets do the good stuff that sounds bad. Right, so how many people here have done at least an intro econ class at some point? Yeah, I have. All right. So if you haven't, you should, or just read the textbook. All right. So if you go to an econ textbook, there's a standard list of market failures. All right. And the standard market failures, so you've got monopoly or imperfect competition, you've got asymmetric information, you've got public goods and externalities, right? A few other ones. All right, so this is a standard thing that you get in textbooks. All right. And when economists go and argue for regulation markets, normally they frame their arguments using these concepts. But if you listen to normal people who are complaining about markets, and of course, almost all complaining about markets is done by non-economists, because non-economists are just a small percentage of the population. If you listen to their normal things, so what normal people are saying, the arguments are actually not very much like the arguments in the textbook. Right? So here's a very common complaint about markets. They downsized thousands of workers just because they didn't need them anymore to run the business. That's terrible. It's a very common complaint. It's like evil greed. You went and fired people just because they weren't useful to you anymore. All right, here's another one. They didn't buy the best safety equipment because it was too expensive. They went and looked and said the equipment cost $1 billion and it's only going to save one statistical life every 1,000 years, so they didn't do it. Can you believe what a horrible person would go and compare those two things? You should just spend an infinite amount for any possible risk, right? That's what you should do, right? It's not what I do with my own time and money, but you should be doing it. All right, or here's another one. They're closing the factories because Chinese products are cheaper. So what are people doing? They're just going and buying stuff from the cheapest vendor, and then the companies, instead of just staying in business forever losing money, decide to shut down. Terrible. Well, this is one from my own area. They're turning the old farm into condominiums. That's terrible. Right? There's a whole giant campaign to save Evans Farm. Right? It's an obsolete farm, losing piles of money. Someone had the idea to buy it and build hundreds and hundreds of homes. All over my area were bumper stickers, Save Evans Farm. That was the only money those people ever spent on the cause, was buying the bumper sticker. Right? Save Evans Farm. Right? Or honestly, a lot of times anti-market protests are just a single word on a sign. Greed. Greed. That's the whole argument. Right, so what is going on? What's going on is markets do good things that sound bad. All right, so first, markets are cost conscious. Markets look at how expensive things are, and if they're too expensive, they say, yeah, like it's really expensive, so we're not going to do it. And every society must make these choices. You can't actually run a society on spend an infinite amount on every problem. You run out of resources after the first problem, because the first problem takes infinite, and that you don't have infinite, and then you're done. All right. So in the real world, it is vital for any decent society to be cost conscious. The richer you are, the more you can afford to spend. But to just say, it doesn't matter what the cost is, that is a terrible attitude and very bad for any society to have. Sounds bad to worry about cost, right? But it's vital for prosperity that someone making decisions says, how much is this going to cost? Right? Markets are also consumer conscious. Markets don't do things just because someone says they're wonderful. Markets actually ask, are there consumers willing to pay for this product? You might say, look, the Bible's the most wonderful book in the world. We should just make it no matter what. It's like, yeah, but nobody's buying them anymore, so we're going to shut down. You're just gonna stop making Bibles simply because you're losing tons of money. Yeah, consumers don't want it. Once again, very important for prosperity that businesses care about what people actually want to spend their money on, right? Which is often very different from what they say they want to spend their money on. They might say they only want to spend their money on, say, helping children. But in the real world, they want to spend money on going to a restaurant. Markets listen to what you really want, what you show with your spending rather than what you say you want. And finally, markets are risk conscious. So markets are willing to gamble if the odds are good. That's the way that people running businesses work. They don't say, I need absolute certainty. They don't say, I will do it if there's any chance at all. Instead, they're saying, well, how does it come out? Like what are the actual odds of success here compared to what's the downside, what's the upside? So markets definitely do not just do the safest thing. Again, during COVID, you might have noticed governments are saying, let's do whatever the safest thing is. Let's just not reopen. Let's never reopen. As soon as reopen, that could cause problems. Yeah, but what are the odds? What are the odds? All right, and then finally, if you just think about profit maximization or greed, what is it? Profit maximization is just doing all three of these things simultaneously. Being conscious of cost, being conscious of what consumers want, and being conscious of risk. Right? If you are cost conscious, consumer conscious, and risk conscious at the same time, that is the same thing as profit maximization. And yet, most economists barely give markets credit for this. Now, if you were all economists or teachers of Econ 1, I think your reaction would be like, everybody knows this. Like, no, not everybody knows this. In fact, most people explicitly deny it. It's like, well, but do we really want to go and spend a lot of time in our econ classes telling them that they're wrong? If they're wrong, then yeah, you probably should. All right, now, flipping over to the government side, right? What governments don't do. So like I said, there's the standard list of market failures. There's monopoly / imperfect competition. There's asymmetric information, externalities in public goods. All right. So there's a standard list of market failures, and there's a standard list of government remedies. How is government, according to the textbook, supposed to fix the economy? The key idea, which was best articulated probably by Arthur Pigou about 100 years ago, and he said, look, basically when there's when there's negative externalities, when markets are making pollution, for example, all right, then just impose a tax comparable to the harm. So if people are going and doing $3 worth of pollution on their commute, go and charge them a $3 tax, and then you're done. That's it. If you want to pay the $3 tax, you can keep driving. If you don't, then you don't. All right? Similarly, for Pigou, if there's positive externalities, offer a subsidy comparable to the gain. So if there's something you're doing, like you're doing research and development, then the Pigovian solution would be to say, all right, well, if we could go and get a cure for cancer, that would be worth $1 trillion. Here's $1 trillion prize for whoever does it. All right, and the last part, the end. All right, if you really understand these ideas, the key part of them is that after you impose the optimal tax, there is no reason for any additional government regulation of any kind. It's like we have given you a tax that is comparable to the harm you're inflicting. Now it is totally fine to do as much of it as you want, as long as you pay the tax. There are no governments on earth that do this. Right? Singapore is the closest. So Singapore raises about 25% of its budget from taxes on pollution and charges for congestion on roads. But that's as high as it gets. Right? And then, so in the real world, what do governments do? The real world? Oh, so actually, hold on. I'm going to get to there. All right. So don't want to get in myself. But anyway, so when there's negative externalities, tax it. Positive externalities, subsidize it. And don't do anything else. Don't go and regulate it. Don't go and have the government own it. The end. The idea of Pigovian remedies is you can do anything you want at all as long as you pay the full price. All right, now this logic is sound. Right? If you go through the textbook, the whole idea does make sense, but it sounds terrible. It's like, look, Rich people should be able to go and pay extra so that they can go and skip the line. It's like, yeah, well, their time is valuable, so that makes sense. All right. Now, so sounds terrible, and then guess what? Consistent with my thesis, no government on earth is anywhere close. If you read econ textbooks, they often talk as if government's already doing this. It's like, what planet are you on? Show me the planet where they just set a price for pollution and then you can do whatever you want. Normally, what governments do is the opposite. No price. If it's allowed, you can do it for free, and if it's forbidden, you can't do it for any price in the world. All right. So no government on earth comes close. All right. So then that brings us to what do governments actually do? Instead of taxing negative externalities, governments write giant books of regulations telling people exactly what you can and can't do down to the very smallest details. Right? Or another thing governments like to do is ban things. Say, no one may do this no matter what. Never. It's like, well, could I use cocaine if I paid like $50,000 extra? Would that be okay? No. Then cocaine would only be for the rich. Well, couldn't you go and use that money for something useful? Like, how much harm do you think I'm really inflicting on the world by using cocaine once? Well, we can't be sure. That's a stupid argument. Yeah, you can't be sure about anything. How about you go and use your best estimate of the actual probability to go and set a tax and then let me do what I want? No. Right. Now, what is the harm of doing regulation and ban instead of just taxes? So first of all, it costs more. Like for any kind of pollution regulation, there are going to be some firms that can reduce pollution more cheaply than others. Regulation will do things like everybody reduces 20%. It would be much cheaper to have 100% of the reduction done by the ones that can avoid it cheaply, and then have all the ones that can only avoid it more with greater costs continue to do it all. That would be what would make sense. But it also, of course, ignores collateral damage. Often there are some big gains to be had by doing something with negative externalities, and if the rules just say you can't do it, then you aren't able to realize those gains. So, for example, suppose that there is a big negative externality of building another skyscraper in Mumbai. Right? It's like $50 million harm from blocking sunlight or something like that. It's like, okay, but the building delivers $1 billion worth of value. So let me go and build it. Here's your 50 million tax, and I build it anyway, and then we realize the gain. Right? Similarly, right, instead of subsidizing positive externalities, governments usually like to monopolize key industries. I understand that's more popular here in India than it is in the US. So governments like to, but like America has tons of government monopolies. Usually they're ones where we don't even think about it. Things like public schooling, where normally your kid has one school paid for by the government. It's the only one he's allowed to go to unless you pay full tuition someplace else. Right? So that's one big one. So education's a big one. It's a huge government role in healthcare, so on. All right. And then here's the weird thing about government monopolies. At least in the United States, in most countries, maybe not in India, but the normal thing is first you create a government monopoly, and then you just give the product away for free. So like that's how education usually works. First of all, government takes taxes, creates the takes over the industry, and then it's free for everybody. All right. Now, again, what is the harm? Well, first of all, it costs more, and second of all, it leads to massive waste. It means, for example, that in the United States, you might spend $13,000 a year on the education of a student that isn't paying any attention and doesn't want to be there. It's like, wouldn't it make more sense to take that $13,000 and just like create a fund for that kid so he can do something that he wants with it? Like, no, he needs his education. Well, need it or not, he's not getting it. He doesn't pay any attention to what you're saying. No, we're going to make sure that he gets it. Right now, next key part of the book is where I actually try to figure out what are the most costly policies that the US government does, or in particular, what are the policies that actually change the economy the most? Right now, you don't need to actually agree that with my assessment of these policies being bad to agree that they transform the economy. And what's striking is that most of them get almost no mention in any econ textbook. Let's start off with the really obvious one for India. The one thing that governments do that actually probably changes the economy more than anything else is ban virtually all immigration. Right, so the United States has more immigrants than any other country, and yet it's still a very small number of people compared to the number that want to come. All right. If there really were open borders, if anyone could just move to the United States for the price of a plane ticket or a boat ticket, then there'd be hundreds of millions more people. Most econ textbooks give maybe 1 or 2 sentences to immigration restrictions. These restrictions change the American economy more than all the other regulations on the book together, and yet barely get any mention because people just think of it as something that has to be there. Right? So that is one big thing that government does. Now, tomorrow I'm going to be talking about my book, Open Borders, where I'm going to tell you I think it'd be great if 1 billion Indians moved to the United States, and I'd love to have you. And I will explain the argument there, but in a very simply, like you guys all know about how if you could get a job in the United States, you would make a lot more money there, right? And not like, what would it be, like 10% more? 20% more? No, hundreds of percent more. All right, so yeah, a small gain would be like a tripling of your income. Right? And then it's like, so why do you want to stop someone from tripling his income? Especially if you understand the basic economics of why would your income be tripled? It'd be tripled because your productivity, your contribution to the economic well-being of the world would also be about 3 times as much. So why does government want to stop labor from moving to places where it contributes more to the world? Right? It is more complicated than that, but we can talk about that tomorrow. Okay, so I say that is the first really big thing that government does. I go over the main arguments for why, first of all, there are, on the surface, seems like there are enormous gains to allowing immigration, and then the arguments against are not really very good, as it turns out. But guess what? The arguments, though not good, are incredibly popular. And in the United States, as you might have noticed, like if you follow U.S. news, during an election year, all candidates are against immigration. Right? It's just like, how can we stop it? What's the best way of preventing people from coming? It's like, well, why do you want to stop labor from moving to places where it's more productive? What kind of crazy person asked that question? All right. Another big thing. So talking trillions of dollars of harm, or at least trillions of dollars of change at minimum, strictly regulating construction. So this will be my other talk to you tomorrow. We'll go over all the ways that the U.S. regulates the building of homes and other structures. Basically, we treat anyone who wants to build anything like a criminal. Very hard to get permission. I've had a couple of Indians argue with me and saying, oh no, we don't have anything like that in India. But, and like it's mostly based upon, well, go to Mumbai and look at all the cranes. We're building a lot of stuff. All right. Your regulation does not prevent all construction. I agree with that. But what would the amount of construction be if the property owner was the only one who decided whether or not he wanted to build something? And if someone wanted to complain, they had to sue you in an Indian court. Now, I've heard it takes a long time to get any action in Indian court, which is, in my mind, is a feature, not a bug, because most complaints are so unreasonable. It's better if it takes forever for them to be actually adjudicated. How many people here have read Alex Tabarrok's post about the apartment building in India that has been repeatedly torn down and then rebuilt because it's illegal? And they can make so much money renting it while they drag the court case out that it actually pays for the full construction cost, even though they know in the end the judge is going to rule that they have to tear it down. And after it gets torn down, guess what? Time to build it again. Right? So that is the system. All right. Another big thing that government does in the US, nearly banning nuclear power. It is almost impossible to build a nuclear plant. In terms of the technology, it really is magic. It is an amazing way to get very cheap power for the world. Actual nuclear power, however, is super expensive because the regulation is so absurdly strict for what is, in fact, the safest kind of energy. Right? And it's like if you count all of the deaths from all of the nuclear accidents that have ever happened, it is still just a couple days worth of deaths from coal. But no, like we can't go and take any chances with nuclear power. That would be terrible. All right. Another big thing the US government does is fund universal redistribution. So in the US, we have some means-tested programs for the poor, which at least have a logic to them. It says, look, we'll take money from rich people who barely appreciate it, give it to some poor people who are desperate, and we will raise the well-being of society. But that is actually a minority of redistribution. Most redistribution is every American deserves a decent retirement paid for by taxpayers. We will tax everyone, give money to everyone, and that's a great system. And I say, yeah, that's crazy. If you were a philanthropist and you wanted to give away $8 billion, what would you think about a plan to give $1 to each person on Earth? Does that sound like a good way to spend $8 billion on philanthropy? It is absurd. It's like, look, there are camps for war orphans. How about you start there? How about you find people who are really desperate? Why are you wasting so much money on people who totally don't need it? Right? And yet, when it's government, like, oh, we are a rich country, we can afford to take care of everyone by having much higher taxes. And then what's the point? Right? And then finally, heavily subsidizing or even fully funding education, healthcare. Again, these are things that governments routinely do. Right? So it's like everyone should have the best possible education, best possible healthcare, paid for in full by taxpayers, or almost paid in full. Now, in all these cases, if you want to say, well, what is the textbook market failure? How does this relate to monopoly or asymmetric information or externalities? Usually, it's actually pretty hard. Right? And so like for the first two, we'll be going over those in detail. Like for nuclear power. Once you realize the alternative nuclear power is usually going to be coal, it's like, well, nuclear power actually makes life a lot safer, a lot cleaner. So if anything, government shouldn't be banning nuclear power. Government should be encouraging nuclear power. But that's not what they do. And why is it? Well, look, if it kills one person, is there a chance and there could be an accident? No, there's no chance, 0%. All right, you can just lie. But yeah, there is some slight chance, but even if it happens, it is actually not going to be that bad. Right, so, Chernobyl, the worst nuclear accident that ever happened. So, a few hundred people died. Right, that is not big compared to standard deaths from coal mining and that kind of thing. And then for like Fukushima, right, you know about Fukushima? All right, so this was actually a nuclear accident that turned the world against coal or against nuclear again. There were starting to be some relaxation, like maybe it's okay. And then Fukushima happened. No, we couldn't possibly do that. Right? And how many people died from the Fukushima accident? Nobody, or actually the Japanese court did finally rule that one did. So I don't scientifically perhaps not, but anyway, just to be fair, one person was legally ruled to have died from it. Dozens died from the ridiculous evacuation. So there were elderly people in the area, and they took people, and also people in hospitals, and they put them onto evacuation buses to get them away from very low doses of radiation that were barely dangerous. And this poorly managed evacuation caused a bunch of people to die. All right, and then universal redistribution. Why does this sound so good to people? Like every American, guarantee. It's like, well, how does it even guarantee it? You could die in a traffic accident and then you don't get a dignified retirement. The technical point. Right? And then, of course, education, healthcare, beloved products politically. When you ask people to actually pay for their own education, their own healthcare, people are a lot more, yeah, do I really want to pay for this? All right, I'll pay for plastic surgery. That's important. Right? It's really important to look my best. But to actually pay for going to like a doctor for the flu, I don't need that. Right, so anyway, the market failures are questionable. All right, the cost of all of these is massive. So these are all in the multi-trillion-dollar range. But the social desirability bias really is quite large. All right, so I'll end it there and now take your questions. Thank you very much. So, if you don't mind, I'll take your questions sitting down. So I've been standing.
So, Bryan, talking about social desirability bias.
Oh, let's see. Can everyone in the back hear him, or does he need to speak up?
Okay. So talking about social desirability bias, are there some cultures that exhibit it more than others? And if yes, do those cultures exhibit more affinity to free trade and lesser regulation than in comparison to others? Do you notice a difference in the form of governments?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think you're almost certainly right that some countries do have higher social desirability bias than others. I don't know of any attempt to actually rank countries, though. So, I mean, like, for example, like, Japan seems to be especially high. but sitting, like it would be hard to do something with that just because I don't see that the ranking there's no ranking out there. So like, does it? Yeah, I mean, I'm not immediate. Yeah.
Germany could be a case in point.
Mhm.
I don't think that. I mean,
So you think of Germany as having high or low
low,
STB? Hmm.
that's what I think. But then the politics doesn't
Mhm.
reflect that.
Mhm.
Not for sure.
Maybe. Um, so, I mean, it's true that if you ask the German directions and they don't know, they will just say "keine Ahnung," which means no idea. So, but I mean, on the other hand, but maybe. I'd have to think about it. It's a good question. Let's see. I saw someone up front. Or yep. Hi. Oh, so I think is everyone supposed to turn on their mics when they talk? Or I guess you don't have one? Or oh, I see. Oh, there's not. There's like shared mics.
Do you think there's a dichotomy between government
Mm-hmm.
and market?
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere the conversation may be we're leaving out the society as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because I also identify only as a very liberal at this point, so
Mm-hmm.
a lot of my understanding is ideally was quite
Mm-hmm.
misleading. And I think when I'm talking about the community, I would like to think that community also exists in separation from the market, because in my head, the understanding of a market is a place where there's a transaction involved and a place where there is a conversation about profit. And I would like to think that not everything revolves around profit.
Mm-hmm. All right, good question. Yeah, so I am, of course, talking to the Center for Civil Society, so I should have expected this question. My honest answer is that yes, there is something other than markets and government, but I will say it does get a much smaller share of actual, like the share of assets that it controls is actually a lot lower than either of those. So I'd still say that it makes sense to talk about markets versus government because for most things, that those are the only alternatives. So. Um, Now there is this civil society other option, which is neither government nor markets, and it does exist. I'll just say it has just a much smaller share of GDP, even if you have a more expansive definition where you're counting donations of time. Um, right? I mean, I'd also say that um, for a lot of the problems that people think of as being handled by government and saying it could be handled by civil society, my honest story is it's not very realistic. So it's not very realistic to think about anything like modern poverty programs being provided by civil society, just because it would require much larger voluntary donations of resources than people are willing to make. But yes, but your basic point is correct. Um, sure, of course.
But what about those spaces where there's a critique of the government,
Mm-hmm.
also of the market?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of that collective critique
Mm-hmm.
can be answered by the society.
Mm-hmm.
And what if not everything can be reduced to just GDP?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of things that can't be captured by the GDP
Mm-hmm.
itself.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, on the one hand, I'm very happy to acknowledge that there are some good things done by civil society. On the other hand, I will say that nonprofit seems totally dysfunctional to me generally. Any nonprofit that I actually spend some time on, I start thinking, wow, this is much closer to government in its efficiency than to markets. Um, so, the whole reason why there is an effective altruism movement is because people notice, wow, people give a lot of money to charity without spending more than about 10 seconds thinking about whether it's actually going to accomplish anything. And that just seems true to me. So, I mean, I guess an honest part of my answer is I think of most of what we call civil society as being similar to government, except that it's funded on private donations, which does put a limit to how wasteful it can be. But here's the thing: I've just worked with a lot of private nonprofits, and I'm kind of horrified by what I've seen. That's just it is so contrary to any idea of effective altruism. You say, well, at least no one makes you go and give money to an ineffective nonprofit. It's like, yes, that is very good. So nobody makes me give money to the New York Ballet. David Koch gave $100 million to the New York Ballet, but yeah, at the time, it's just like, what a stupid thing to give money to. Yes, way in the back there. Yes. You. Yes, you. So can you speak into the mic? I think you have to turn it on. Not hearing you. Not working. Okay, okay. Just be really loud and project your voice, please. Mm-hmm. 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 So no. So we got very good data on what economists think by political affiliation, and basically the way Democratic economists generally are apologists for the world as it is. So government as it is. Normally, what they've got is I'm skeptical of protectionism, and like a couple of other things, and then the rest of the stuff they're very accepting of. So I say the normal view for Democratic economists in the United States is, isn't it great that we have government to go and solve all these market failures? That's the usual view. Yeah, it's not primarily that I'm pro-LGBT or something like that. I mean, there's that too, but as economists, they're just very supportive of government. And actually, if you go, when you go through the data, what you'll see is there's about another 40% of Republican economists who are about the same way. So free market economists are really a minority of a minority. Right? The economists who actually are affirmatively favorable towards markets, it is just a very small group who have, of course, punched way above weight and gotten a large share of Nobel Prizes. But at the same time, as I say in the book, possibly you guys will change this, but right now it looks like free market economics is going to extinction, right? Because we have failed to reproduce ourselves. And the younger generation, like I said, you're at a ratio of about 20 Democrats per Republican. So this is, I feel like I've done my part, but nevertheless, so you just got to, again, trying to be brutally honest. If something does not change, free market economics is going to be basically extinct from American academia in another 30 years. Yes, please.
I'll also try to be loud because.
All right.
So is STB somewhat about framing and rhetoric? Is there a way you can frame more efficient market outcomes in a way that is more socially desirable? That's the first part of the question. Or if you say that maybe it's not possible, in that case, is it possible in places where shit has hit the fan? So where people have tried every alternative and they've seen that the government does not work, right? And the government has failed so miserably.
Yeah.
Case in point, Eastern Europe. Case in point, Malays, victory in Argentina.
All right, so two great questions. All right, so for the first question, can you get around social desirability bias with better framing or marketing? And the answer is you absolutely can, but it's hard, especially when you have an opponent who is trying everything they can to stop you from framing it that way. So, what I found is that it's much easier to persuade people in a lecture than in a debate. Because in a debate, your opponent can just be saying the opposite of you, and you can be making your arguments, but they make their arguments. And if their arguments, they can be trying to be rhetorically persuasive too. What I say is that bad ideas have a basic advantage of they're not constrained by the facts or honesty, and good ideas, there's a problem. Now, one thing you could do is say, all right, fine, we will defend good ideas with lies. All right, and what would that be? So lies like free markets always work, never fail. All right, so, yeah, that's not true. There's a bunch of times when markets have done bad things. All right, but maybe you can just get elected by lying like that. When you look at actual politicians, it seems like history is proven without exception. Let's think about what could be true that finishes that sentence. History is proven without exception that no human being is over 100 feet tall. All right, that would be true, and it's been proven without exception, but it has to be a really bland statement before you get away with that. Now, what about when the bad stuff hits the fan? So the answer is that when you are very lucky and things have gone really wrong, then people will try something new that works. But I do have a whole paper on this called The Idea Trap, and I say, unfortunately, normally when things are going bad, people just go and double down on something even worse, and things get worse. Right? So, I mean, think about like Afghanistan, which is not even that far from you, is it? All right, so it's a really messed up country, right? Do you think they're going to realize how messed up they are and say, gee, we really need to learn from any country but our own? Like the Afghan way has totally failed. There is nothing of value to learn from our own culture. We must swallow our stupid pride and learn from a successful country like Japan. Let's try to be just like Japan, right? One can imagine it, but it's very unlikely. So it's much more common actually when things are really bad that things just collapse in civil war, or people turn to some horrible dictator who like makes everybody so afraid to complain that you no longer hear complaints about how people are starving to death, but it doesn't stop people from starving to death. So yes, like you can get lucky when things get really bad, but I mean honestly, I think like you're at, in some ways you're more likely to get good reforms when things are going well. So like if like your country is prospering, this is where it's like, well, now I think we like given our all this extra wealth, I think we can admit that we've really been screwing up on road pricing. And maybe you could actually start doing what you guys should be doing, which is having electronic tolls. So you could solve your congestion problem, right? And not just improve, solve, right? High enough tolls will solve the problem. I understand people are going to get upset about it, but maybe, hopefully not you guys, but let's see, other questions? Let's see, yes, yeah.
Like I want to make a point against free markets that like big businesses don't serve the poor. Like business would always like to serve the person who has money in his pocket, rich have more money in their pockets. So the big business will always serve the rich person. There won't be enough products and services for the poor. So there's a case for redistribution.
Right. Right. So the general idea that business does not serve the poor is one of the craziest ideas out there. You can look at businesses like Walmart, which is like one of the largest corporations in the United States. Their main business model is selling cheap stuff to people with lower incomes. Right? And the main thing is, look, there you may get less money per poor customer, but there are so many more of them. Right? So you can go and charge really high prices for custom-made suits for a few rich customers, or you can go and mass-produce clothing of lower quality for the vast majority of the population. It's the second thing that's really the bigger business. So yeah, I mean, I say like business is happy to serve the poor and does it all the time.
And maybe one last question
Okay.
before we close.
Let's see. So have someone who hasn't asked a question yet? You didn't ask one, right? Okay.
Sure.
Yes.
So I think we have a pretty strong case for why government is inefficient, right? And I just wanted to ask you, like, given the same, theoretically, what's the best maximum utility we can sort of derive from government? Or maybe we do not need government at all. Some people would say, no, it's anarchy, that's really. So what are your views on this?
Well, I'd say like the simplest thing is just listen to Arthur Pigou. Tax negative externalities, subsidize positive externalities, the end. So this requires having government go and actually estimate what the externalities are. Right. So I mean, which again is another thing governments almost never do. Even when government has a tax on something, it's almost never based upon an effort to actually measure a negative externality. It's more like a politician saying 60 cents sounds like a good number. Right? And when the number, and you'll notice like in the United States, like often a government will go and set a tax, and the tax on something, and the tax just stays the same for years. Often it's just set in nominal terms, not even adjusted for inflation. So I say that would be the really obvious thing for government to do, is just actually following Pigou's recipe. Now, it sounds like you are wondering about anarcho-capitalism, something I'm not going to give any talks on. I did do a debate on it. It's an idea where I would say, if you could have your mind changed on it in an hour talk, you're crazy. Right? So normally whenever I'm asked to give a talk on it, I'll say, all right, it is my view. I will talk about it. But I start off by saying, look, my goal here is not to change your mind about the subject. My goal is to convince you that I'm not crazy. Right? And so I did do a debate on this where, in my mind, I just crushed my opponent. But Of course, a lot of people who were there thought that he crushed me, but no, I crushed him. Yes. Pardon?
Social desirability bias.
Yes, yes. Yes, yes. Yes, he had a lot of things about, look, a just government would do this. Like, well, name a government you consider just. Like, the important thing is not, the important thing is changing the subject. Right? That's what's really important. All right, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep, you guys are great.
Bye-bye.
Yep.